Hey there, everybody, thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking a look at the two new books from Magnetic Press. These collect George Bess's adaptation of the horror classics Frankenstein and Dracula. Pretty big fan of George Bess's work from his collaborations with Jodorowsky, and pretty big fan of Magnetic Press, so I was really excited to get these books. You can see this is something I backed on Kickstarter, so it came with these prints here, a number of these custom prints, some stickers, which is kind of these are very strange stickers, but I could see someone putting those on their laptop, I guess. And then I think probably the coolest little extra is like this commemorative coin here that has these patterns stamped into them in low relief, and it has like the dates of the books on them, and then the dates that George Bess, well, actually no, this is 2023, so the date of the production of the English translation. Really cool to have the dates on here, because one of the things I was wondering as I was reading this is what was made when. I've never read either of these novels. Also interesting because I just finished reading the Guido Crepa Volume 1 that had his versions of Frankenstein and Dracula in them. And so I've been thinking about the books a lot lately. Frankenstein much earlier in 1818 and Dracula much later in 1897. I didn't know that. I would have assumed that they were more contemporary than that. On to the production of the books, because that's something worth commenting on in this case. I think the prints and the covers of the books are really sexy looking. Like the overall design of these is really sexy. They have these nice little placeholder ribbons here, this nice foil on them. As is always the case with Magnetic, they always do these rounded corners, which I really, really like on their books. Big fan of that. But I do have some problems with some of the production on this. I think some strange decisions were made. One is that on the prints and on the cover here, they're done on this. Well, actually, they're done. No, they're both on it. They're done on this like canvas texture, and then on this one at least, no, on both of them, there's some kind of like gloss pattern put over it, which is maybe where the canvas texture is coming from. But it's like this little dot pattern, and the dots are in squares. They're not even evenly distributed. There's like these little ridges between them, and I think they're intended to give it that canvas texture. But it looks really strange. It looks like there's a dot pattern over the whole thing. The other thing is, like, this is actually, I don't know, maybe it is the same thing, but it feels like a paper with the texture on it. And when you print like such clean line art on something like canvas, it's immediately going to disrupt the line art. So it's very strange looking. And then on the solid blacks, like this pattern is really, really obvious. And it's not just an even dot pattern. So I think the intention to make this like a sexy tactile book was right, but I think maybe there was a way to do it where the line art remained untouched. So I thought that was a bit strange, but I do really like the overall design and look of the design of the books, and the red foil and the silver foil on Dracula. That's all really nice. On the inside, there's kind of the same problem with the art, in that the art is halftone, so the lines don't come across as clean as they could. But that said, there are some just really beautiful illustrations in here as well, like this opening piece here for Dracula. Just a really, really cool design and really cool spread in the book. Some other images like this, just again, some really, really cool illustrations. I think when George Bess is taking on these big spreads and doing these big illustrations is where he's at his best. Some of the other things that I noticed is that my impression, I'd have to go back and look, my impression of George Bess from his collaborations with Jodorowsky is that he's someone who's really, really good with like a nib pen or a brush, and I really like the way he uses those tools. In this, it looks like in both of these books, it looks like he's switched to working with pigment liners or something like that. It looks like he's using a tool where he's not getting a lot of line weight variation. And so I think that actually leads to his work being a little like gunkier feeling. The lines aren't as graceful, they're a little clumpy. So I was a little bit disappointed in that. But there are still these really powerful composition and images, like here when you're first meeting Dracula at his castle for the first time. I really like the design of Dracula here. He seems scary but charming and elegant at the same time. So there's things like that in the art where I really like some of the art, and there's other points like this where, you know, overall this is a cool composition and a cool scene, but the handling, I don't know if it's partly just the print job, because the print job's half toned instead of just like black on paper. It's all made out of dots, but it just looks like not as graceful as I'm used to from his art. It looks like someone working with the micron. It looks like, you know, the hatching's getting a little too close. It looks like it's bleeding on the paper in places. I think one of the reasons that this book is half-toned rather than printed with ink is that there are a number of places where Bess uses a wash. I don't know if this was supposed to be seen in color or seen in black and white, because on the back they talk about these as being artist editions. So I think there is some attempt to not adjust the artwork and treat it as like a, you know, a print as it would for a book, like trying to preserve the washes, trying to preserve the variations in black in the ink. But overall, that leads to like a muddy production. Now, anytime an artist is using washes directly on a page, like here you have these washes directly on a page where the rest of it's black and white, that makes a problem for the people reproducing it, because you have to treat this area different than that. And if you're not willing to take the time to prepare this one way and prepare it the other and put them together in Photoshop like Sean would be doing, the default is just to go to half-toning, but it muddies up the really fine artwork. The other thing, talking to Magnetic Press about their Sergio Topi books, they run into a problem with the Sergio Topi books where they get the files half-toned, so there's nothing they can do about it. So I don't want to put any of that criticism on Magnetic, because I don't know. Usually their books are pretty impeccable and pretty beautiful. So I'm thinking this might be a file type problem, but I'm not sure, because looking at the artwork, and it doesn't feel like what I'm used to from Bess. So I'm wondering if he's getting older, and I look at the dates, and these are things that were published not that long ago in Europe. So I think this is an artist older, maybe having trouble controlling those old tools or something. It's strange to me that they wouldn't have access to the original art if it's being, or good scans of the original art if it's being reproduced more clearly. But when you license something, you kind of get the files that you get. So I don't know. I don't want to have it be as a criticism of Magnetic, because I really do enjoy their books and love what they're doing. Here's another cool George Bess piece using these really Art Nouveau. It is, looking through this, you know, seeing drawings like this that I don't think are the best drawings I've ever seen from Bess. I do feel like this is an aging master just getting back to, you know, kind of just pushing through and doing a pretty good piece of work. But it's just not, I don't know, maybe I'm used to seeing his work colored. Here's a Van Helsing. I do like the Van Helsing design here. And here's his Renfield. Just kind of going through and seeing all of the characters. It's interesting comparing this also to the Crepa, which I just finished, seeing that this is like more realistic. It has these moments here where you have these beautiful illustrations like this. But I think overall the Crepa one was more iconic somehow, even though it strayed from the story further. It definitely, I don't know, felt like it had lasting images. But this does have these really, really cool designs like this throughout. Something about just the way Crepa designs, though, leaves a really lasting impression. So pretty much all the same criticisms apply to the production of the Frankenstein book. Here you see another example of where George Bess is using wash in the images, which would have made the reproduction more difficult. But when I look at this, I don't know why you would want wash there even. Like, I'm imagining this moon being a big, bright, white area in the composition, helping pop the ship out, and I think that would be more interesting. So there's some weird choices here and there. One thing I really, really appreciated about this both of these books, though. I've never read either of these books, but when I was reading the Crepaw versions, I was like, if things felt so strange, I couldn't imagine, like, it didn't match my idea of what those stories were. Now, in both cases, it seems like those are things that the Hollywood versions have just edited out, but Crepaw did add stuff to it as well. The George Best ones feel, again, this is someone who's not read the book. It feels very much like all the captions are pulled directly from the books. I don't know that it has like everything. I don't know that the book is here in full, but it feels like if there's text in here, it's from the book, and it feels like they follow the story very clearly. And having read the Crepaw one, knowing that Frankenstein is kind of that they both do travel all over the world, and they're a little bit bigger stories than I thought. And my idea of Frankenstein was he makes the monster and he goes down to the village and like rescues the girl and then gets killed. I didn't realize that there was this whole other. I thought like Bride of Frankenstein was a sequel or so. I don't know. There's just a bunch of stuff in here that I didn't expect. So I do really appreciate that these George Best ones are trying, as from what I can tell, to be really true to the source material, because it's the first time I feel like I've seen those, first time I've experienced those stories in their original form, and that gave me a much greater appreciation for both of the stories. But there is, like, in terms of a Dracula and Frankenstein, it's hard not to think, like, why would you, if this is what you're gonna do for your Frankenstein, why would you attempt that after someone like Bernie Wrightson had their hand at it? It's like, if you've never seen the Bernie Wrightson one, this is all really great. You think, wow, what a detailed comic. But there's just certain things that I feel like have had their definitive visual versions, and it seems pretty brave for Bess to be going and doing this. There's a few things that are interesting to me in this story, that the humpback is named Sven, not Igor. Also realizing that the Frankenstein monster is pretty much one body, who was a bodybuilder that they got the corpse of, and then his head had got crushed, so having the brain replaced, and then the sewing and stitching is just like some guts and stuff were put in and some surgery was done. But seeing that that's where that big gigantic frame come from is pretty cool. And then here's like one of Bess's illustrations. So a really cool monster, really nice picture. But again, when you're thinking about like the most iconic versions, or like a Mike Mignola doing it or something like that, I don't think this kind of has that same oomph to it. It's interesting that like Crepaw would do both of these stories and Bess would do both of these stories. These seem like something a lot of artists feel like they need to touch on, and I get why, because they're so important to how our culture and sci-fi and horror and all of that have developed. But yeah, once Bernie Wrightson touches, I don't know, I would leave it alone. Yeah. But there are, again, when Bess goes to these, I think these landscape drawings is when he's at his best. These really big, sprawling compositions that have a lot of depth and space. And this really enhanced the story for me, because you get a sense of like how pure and beautiful and curious this creature is. This is something also that in, like, I don't know, I've never been a big Frankenstein guy, so I guess I had a silly view of what the book was, but the way he learns, the way he watches this family come up, this character Safi, who's like from another culture, that it's all really bad coincidence. Now I'm critiquing the Mary Shelley story, not the George Best, but it's all like silly coincidence that this creature just happens to stumble upon a family where someone's also learning English and he's able to learn. But it paints a really beautiful picture of the character and the character's intentions and his motivations and how he turns into a monster. I also think it's a really good grappling, if this is coming out in 1818, it's really grappling with the onset of science and the diminishment of religion and all of these things that Nietzsche would go on to describe. And Mary Shelley kind of gets there first, where, they're talking about the loss of faith in the creator, and kind of has the same opinion about a creator God that I do, is like, here he says, "Hateful day when I received life. Why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust, accursed creator?" If you believe in God the creator, then it's just hard not to see it as like this sadistic thing that you made me, you set the rules, you put me here, and now I have to do something to get to you. Like, I have to behave to get your attention. Like, I didn't ask for any of this, accursed creator, like, don't turn away from me in disgust. So Dracula, the story didn't really grip me so much, but Frankenstein, where you can go through and really read the original story as intended, like, it's a really good, really, really powerful story. It obviously set the tone for so much to come after it, including Dracula. That was the other thing that, in reading both of these adaptations, the Bess adaptations and the Grubaugh adaptations, we'll just leave it here on this beautiful spread as I ramble. I could really see that you can't have Dracula without Frankenstein. That's why I was so interested in the dates, because they seem so contemporary, but they're like almost 90 years removed or so, 80 years removed. So it's really cool to see that as well. And I was also noting that in Frankenstein, you get basically the suspicion is aimed towards science. Like, obviously the supernatural element, the monster, is what everyone's trying to kill, but the monster is not supernatural. He's the product of a scientific experiment. So at that point, like, the supernatural is almost trusted more than the scientific. That those are things for God to deal with, and you don't mess with them. And if you're coming in and playing God, then you're just going to create an awful thing. Whereas in Dracula, it's like the superstitious element, the supernatural element's the bad guy, the thing to be feared. And they bring in the scientist, who's also open-minded to things that science has not yet understood, to defeat Dracula in the Van Helsing. So I think that's interesting, as these things 80 years apart during the Enlightenment period, where we're kind of doing that switch from a religious society, a myth-based society, to a scientific society. You kind of have these capstone books that sum up, like, the hesitation of going into the scientific project, and then the hesitation with what had come before, nearing kind of the culmination of the uncriticized scientific project, I guess. So really interesting to read the two back to back. Really appreciate having these adaptations here that are more faithful, even though there are some of those production things, and even though I do feel like George Bess is, like, there's designs like this throughout where I really feel like Bess is still killing it, but there's other areas where I feel like he's not quite the artist that I remember from, the stuff with Jodorowsky. And a lot of that, to me, honestly seems like a change in tools to pigment liners rather than dip pens and brushes. So I'm a bit split on these. I think they're very cool. I think overall they're very beautiful packages. I have some issues with the production. I think some of the design choices of the material choices are a bit weird. But I do think they're nice books. They're going to sit on the shelf well. And I do think when I want to go back to, I don't know, I mean, I should probably read the original books, but who wants to read a book? I got picture books here. These would be the ones I would go back to if I was going to go in it for the story. I think, if you go for art, go get Wrights and stuff. The Grubaugh ones, I think, are more design oriented. This one has those few spreads and things, but the rest of it's more like panel to panel type of stuff. So I don't know. I don't even know if you can still get these things. They were through a Kickstarter. I think Magnetic's pretty good about releasing these to the general market afterwards. So, it just depends for what your interests are and how picky you are about printmaking and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of beautiful stuff to recommend here. The Eisner nominated The Strange Death of Alex Raymond by Dave Sim and myself. This is a gorgeously illustrated and designed book. Dave doing most of the illustration. Amazing compositions throughout. What Dave is doing is he's recording his obsession with the death of master cartoonist Alex Raymond behind the wheel of Stan Drake's car when they got into a car crash. The best description of the book that I've heard is that it's like understanding comics with pages like this mixed with something like From Hell, when you get into the theories about what actually happened with the car crash. And then with Sean on production, it's just one of the most gorgeously printed books you could get a hold of.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.